Welcome back to Biz Audio, everyone. My name's Max, and look, it was a really busy week in the audio industry. I started off Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. There was something off. There was a lot more news than usual, but it ended off rather quiet, except for Friday's news with Kyle Sandilands appearing in front of the court. He actually said if he had the chance, he would get back air on Monday. That's how determined he is to get back on air. That's how soon he wants to get back on air. And I think that we have a lot to look for between ARN and Kyle Sandilands. But Chrissy and Bex team up for Weekend Breakfast over at 91.9 CFM. They've announced their new Weekend Breakfast show. And it's from 7 a.m. on CFM and actually started yesterday. So that's great to see. And at the Super Radio Network, we finally heard who the new CEO will be. Graham Mott has been appointed the second CEO of the Super Radio Network, following the departure of inaugural CEO Rice Holleran, who joined the network in October 2025. He's no stranger to the radio industry, previously working at Fairfax Radio, and the Super Radio Network, of course, has stations across New South Wales, Queensland, and the Northern Territory. So it's quite interesting to see. Look, the Super Radio Network wants to head in a direction where I hope they will re-emerge in the ratings in Sydney. Of course, we did have that ratings survey in Campbelltown that we didn't really get a rough idea of how many listeners they would have. Of course, Campbelltown, smaller market area, and 2SM was, I think, minus... I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was smaller numbers. But look, I don't think I think we take that as with a grain of salt. But look, moving up to RCS Worldwide, they've named their new president and CEO Susan Larkin. And Susan brings a proven track record of operational leadership and strategic execution across some of the largest audio and media platforms in the world. That was announced on LinkedIn on Thursday. So not too much happening Thursday, actually. That was probably the only bit of news that I sort of reported. Actually, no, hold on. 6IX in Perth. I'll write an article about this tomorrow. Mike Parry has decided to retire after a 40-plus career in radio. That was announced on Facebook, and I noticed that on Thursday as well. But looking over to next week, what we can look for in radio, look, I don't think there's much that we can anticipate. I think that it's everything's up in the air, to be completely honest. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens between ARN and Kyle. But look, I can't say what's going to happen. I'm not a legal expert. I'm a radio expert, though, and I do know a lot about radio. But so that should be interesting to see. Of course, nothing from Jackie O. She's stayed awfully quiet throughout all of this. I think that Jackie O's sort of keeping her head down after she's said that she didn't quit, and she was very disappointed with how things are playing out. And look, I think that I was talking to some people the other day, and it'd be interesting to see if Carl calls up any witnesses in court. I'm not sure how it sort of works in court. Maybe that's why I should pay attention in legal studies. But look, I think that some witnesses could be called up, and we could hear from some people in the industry. Of course, at the front of court the other day, it was really, really interesting to see. They called it the full Loon Brigade. He was greeted at the front of the court with a few, I think it's something about anti-vaxxers questioning him, and Bruno, his manager, was right next to him. I met Bruno, and a lovely person. When I did work experience there, and it was hilarious just to see Kyle back in the public, and it just felt like he was back on air once again. But look, I'll have some more of your stories next week. I'm so excited to see Rating Survey 2. Now, of course, Survey 1, as Peter Samuel said, I think we can disregard it. It's null and void. Survey 2 will prove much more difficult for the Sydney market. I think we can see a lot more changes, possibly some changes in Nova Breakfast with Ricky, Lee, and Tim. Of course, their first full survey is Survey 2 as the new breakfast duo on Nova, and Jonesy and Amanda. What a great result for them. I didn't really highlight this much in Survey 1, but they had a great result. I don't think they dropped much at all. Nationally, I think, nationally, and I think that their show is sounding very much similar. So, and one thing I did want to note actually, Cruise 1323. I think we're about to get Gold 1323 very, very soon. I noticed on the Cruise 1323 website, I do check this mostly daily because I'm excited to see when Gold 1323 will come along. I did see that the Christian O'Connell show is playing from 5 to 6 p.m. weeknights on Cruise 1323. So I think they're gradually shifting over to the Gold format bit by bit. Of course, Cruise 1323 is the last station under the old sort of imaging on the Pure Gold network, under the old sort of WS sort of logo style. But I'm excited to see what happens next with Cruise 1323. I think there's a lot of potential for that station. They had a cracker book in the last survey. I think rising up or more than a point in different areas, but they had a shocking year last year after John Dean did announce his departure. But it's nice to see that little station is still chugging along and moving back to where it should be as one of the more popular AM stations in Adelaide.